Hey, Bible study besties. We are so glad that you are here for another episode. We are so glad that you are back to join us this week for our episode of the background of the book of Ruth. Hopefully, that call to action that we gave you wasn't too bad, but I pray that as you have been listening to these episodes, that you have been gaining confidence to study His Word on your own.
Yes.
And I am so excited for what we're talking about today. We're talking about the background of the book of Ruth, and we're actually going to be answering our who, what, when, where, why, and our how for our questions. And to go back to our previous episode, when I mentioned about who, it's actually important that we understand who the characters are, but also who wrote the book. The authorship of the book is very important. So when you're thinking about, again, narrative, parable, or letter, you have the who are the characters, but you also have who wrote the book as well. And so when we look at the who of the characters for the book of Ruth, we have Naomi's family. So who are in Naomi's family? Naomi, Elimelech, and their sons, Mahlon and Chilion. But you also have the daughter-in-laws. You have Ruth, and you also have Orpah. Orpah, I think that's how you pronounce it.
I think that's good.
Boaz. I literally had to listen to it to make sure I got the pronunciation right. Orpah, and
You did. That's true. True story.
And then also you have, of course, Boaz. And when you think about the genre of the book of Ruth, you have that it's under the book of history. It's historical genre. And so if you didn't know that our Bible is actually broken up into different genres, we have the books of law, or it's known as the Torah. You have the first 5 books. So that's Genesis, Exodus, you have Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And I almost forgot what I was saying for a second. I know the first 5 books. Y'all, this podcast is real honest, and I love it. You have books of history. So this is where Ruth falls under. You have poetry and wisdom. So Ecclesiastes, you have Job, Psalms, and then you have the prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Obadiah, all of those books.
Yep.
And then you have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have Acts, which is actually its own genre in itself. It's the book of Acts. And then you have letters, so all of Paul's letters, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Ephesians, Philemon, you have Colossians, so those are all letters.
Yep.
And then you have apocalyptic literature, which is the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation has its own genre. So we want to make sure that we're capturing the history of the book of Ruth. And actually, when I was doing some research for this, we actually don't know who wrote the book of Ruth. We don't know the definitive author and the authorship of the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
But it's actually really cool what I found, that some scholars say that Samuel wrote it, but they say it's unlikely because he died before King David's reign. He died before King David became king of Israel. And so also too, this author, again, we don't know who wrote the book of Ruth, was a storyteller. So remember back in the previous episode, I said that it's a powerful narrative. So what this author did for this book, it captured just the essence and the amazing story of how God redeemed Naomi's family. And so this author was a storyteller, and it's really cool that the NIV Biblical Theology Bible says that actually this author was a storyteller and had access to the history of David's family. So I thought that was really interesting when I did my own background and research also for this podcast. And y'all, actually, as a teacher, I'm actually learning as well. So don't think just because I'm, doing these episodes, I'm actually learning as well.
Yeah.
And so it's actually really cool that we're learning as well.
Absolutely.
And so, right. And it's really interesting when you look at background knowledge. There's just some things that you may not have known before, or there are some things that you may have discovered and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this makes so much sense. And actually one of those things is that Ruth is David's great-great-grandmother, if y'all didn't know that.
Yeah. So when we're talking about who wrote it down, I think we have to remember initially that this culture that we're speaking of is a verbal culture, that this was initially a story that was told over and over again for generations, just like stories that maybe you and I, Christina, have in our family that have passed down Yeah, from generation to generation. And so
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have the publishing companies like we have in 2025, that
No, they
these
did not.
stories
They
were
did have
not
tablets
written
though.
down. That these were actually verbal stories that would be told from generation
Mm-hmm.
to generation. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but this would have been a story that was told at a very particular festival.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I love that you said passed down because immediately what my mind thinks about is Deuteronomy 6.
Mm,
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And so they tell them, literally tell them in Deuteronomy 6 that Moses tells them, pass this down to your children. Make sure you, I think,
yeah,
write it. I forgot exactly where
yeah,
Deuteronomy 6 to write it, but it's to remember and to
yeah.
hear and to listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And so I
Mm,
love that you spoke about passing down from generations to generations because I know this is not our text, but even in the Psalms, like all throughout the Psalms, it says from generation to
yeah.
generation. And
Yes.
so that's exactly what you mean by it being passed down and it was spoken verbally.
Yes. Yeah. So good. That's such a good word there. So that is the who. And now we're going to also look at the when. So we can
Mm-hmm.
actually find that right in the book of Ruth, right in Ruth 1. It says this took place during the time of the judges. And
Mm-hmm.
as Christina and I are teaching you how to fish, not just handing you fish, we hope that last week you dug in. Remember, we said this is like shallow digging, not necessarily deep digging, but you dug in a little bit to see what the time of judges in particular was. And so after Joshua had died, we had the time of the judges, and that kind of time was just a little bit slightly chaotic for the people of Israel.
Like,
It really went a
really?
little bit downhill. Judges 21-25 really sums up those days well. And that says, in those
Mm-hmm.
days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So when we think
Mm-hmm.
about our own lives, if everyone is kind of doing what was right in their own eyes, it might be slightly chaotic. And so this might feel a little bit vague to us in 2025 when we talk about the when and the time of the
Mm-hmm.
judges, but we have to remember that this is actually a historical time that took place
Mm-hmm.
in a particular time of history. So tell us, Christina, a little bit about that when. Now we know a big picture time of the judges, but when
Yes.
was that taking place?
Yes. So the book of Judges, so the book that we read, it was written in 586 BC. And so, as we can see, if you read actually the last sentence in the book of Judges, Ruth is just right next to that book. Ruth is the next book. And so Ruth takes place around that time of the Judges. That's why it says it.
Yeah.
And also, too, the book ends with a genealogy of David. And the next book is for Samuel and eventually will lead to David's story and his
Yes.
kingship.
Absolutely. So that just really helps us put into context what is happening,
Mm-hmm.
like the when of what is going on. And then
Yes.
we get to what, and the what is happening, big picture. Again, remember, this is a shallow dig. This isn't a deep dig here, but what is going on? What is happening? We see again in Ruth 1 that there is a
Mm-hmm.
famine in the land. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have the land, we have the land of Israel, the Judah there. And what is
Mm-hmm.
happening is that there is a famine. And people are hungry, right? It's hard to get food. And so that is the what,
Right.
big picture. We want to make sure we're thinking as we talked about previously in one of the previous, we mentioned it briefly, I should say previously in one of the previous episodes. When we study
Mm-hmm.
God's word, we really want to be using some holy imagination there. And so we want to be thinking, okay, what is actually happening? Like what drove Naomi and her husband away from the land? What would it actually be like to live in
That's
a
a good
famine?
question.
Yeah. And so we can use some imagination in our own lives. I've never lived through a famine, but for sure we can read books in our own personal American history about what it was like to live during times of hardship, maybe in the West
And
with locusts
scarcity.
or I'm thinking like, I've never lived through it, but what would that be like? And so we can use our imagination, place ourselves there and say, okay, what
Mm-hmm.
drove these people away? Well, they were living in a famine. What did that mean for their family? So that is the what is going on, what is happening, where, again, hopefully you all found this in the book of Ruth. But we see there that initially this happened in Bethlehem in Judah. Bethlehem should be a very familiar place
We
to
all should know
many of
Bethlehem.
you. And we will talk more about that when we talk about Boaz, but Bethlehem should be a familiar place to you all. That name might sound a little bit familiar to you. And then the
Yes.
people are Naomi and her husband Elimelech, they went to Moab. And so we are hoping that you guys got to see a map, that you opened up a map in the study Bible, perhaps in your study Bible, or maybe you went online onto the Bible Hub and that you opened up a
Or Bible
map.
Project. They've seen it on
Yeah.
there.
Yes, or the Bible Project. And if and we're able to look at a map. It is, I find it so important, enlightening, and just visually to get a picture and just to remind myself, like, these are real places. This isn't a
Yes.
fantasy.
Real places. Right.
And so if you didn't get if you haven't looked at a map yet, that's totally fine. We're including a link to one in the show notes. So please go back and look at that map, ground yourself, your feet in that place, even though you've probably never traveled there. Maybe some of you have. Ground yourself in that place and see, okay, Bethlehem was here, Moab was here. So ground yourself in that. Go to the show notes and look at the map there.
That's really good. And to almost put yourself in the perspective about even how far they had to travel.
Yes.
Like how far, like it, at least don't quote me on this, Heather, but I think it doesn't necessarily say how long this famine was, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could have been some time. I mean, we don't know the journey that they had. Sometimes it depends on the text, but it will tell us specifically how long it takes to go X, Y, and Z to whatever place. And so the fact that they had to travel to a distant land to find food, it's almost kind of like, wow, Lord, we are actually very grateful that we can just go right up the street to, our local store and get food. But then, but seriously, but then they had to walk.
Yeah.
They walked everywhere. And so to Heather's point, like you were saying, finding the setting is extremely important, and looking at maps and visually seeing that, like, oh, this is some distance. Like, this is not up the street like what I'm used to.
This isn't around the block.
This isn't around the block. Exactly. This is going to take some walking, and my feet are going to be killing me. But, but we want to know, why is it so important to study Ruth in its context? Like I said, like we said earlier, what was happening? Where was this happening? But now we're into the why. And the why for the book of Ruth is, it was actually during the time of the Festival of Weeks. And so I don't know if some of our listeners know, but actually in the Old Testament, this is one of 7 feasts in the Old Testament. And so that scripture reference is Deuteronomy 16, 9 through 12. And so what the Feast of Weeks is you would count off for 7 weeks from the time you begin to put sickle in the standing grain. Now, again, there's so much in that sentence, like, like, what is sickle? Like, I have to look it up myself. What is sickle? We know standing grain is grain what they use for food. And so that is the time of week. So it's like 7 weeks. You count off 7 weeks. That's the name of the festival. And so Bible dictionary that I have says it was celebrated 55 days after Passover. And so I don't know if we all remember Passover, but in Exodus, Passover, the death angel passed over the doorpost when they had to put the blood on the lamb, when they were getting ready to go into the Red Sea. The Lord was going to part the Red Sea. That's what Passover is. And so that's the significance of one of the festivals is Passover. And also, too, it's one day, but it's completed after the wheat harvest. And as you continue to read the book of Ruth, maybe some light bulbs will go off, that you will see those words. You'll see actually wheat, and you'll see barley in there. And so as you can see, why we have to do the background on the Festival of Weeks, that's important, because as you can see, it was completed after the wheat harvest.
Yes. And we're going to be reading a lot about, you've already read, if you've already read through Ruth, you read a lot about harvesting there. And you can see why this story was incorporated into this festival because of that. I also think that you talked about, or you mentioned, Christina, that it was celebrated 55 days after Passover. And I think we think of Pentecost as a modern day event from Acts 2. And it's so important that we remember that Pentecost actually comes from a historical festival, and that God just used
Mm-hmm.
it as a way to mark his new covenant with his
Mm-hmm. That's
people.
good.
And again, remembering that context is king, and it allows us to understand the
Picture.
big picture of what is
Mm-hmm.
happening, so that we can root ourselves and everything that we're reading within that big
Yes.
picture.
And also too that we're rightly reading, as I like to call it.
Yeah,
We're not guessing as to like, well, maybe I can kind of see what's going on, but no, there's information out there. And like we said in our last episode, we've given you resources and tools to rightly read the book of Ruth in its
yeah,
entirety. Knowing that time period, knowing the setting, we probably can't like emphasize this enough that it is so important to get background knowledge of the book you're reading.
yeah.
In this particular, the book of Ruth.
Yes, yes. And we
That's
will
good.
finish up here with the how. And I understand you all probably, especially for the why and the how, there's a lot of ways, I guess, that the Spirit maybe spoke to you, and the why and the how
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
particular. But I just summed up the how is that what is being shown here in this story that was repeated during the Festival of Weeks is that this is the
Mm-hmm.
redemptive work that God is going to do through Jesus. Like he was
Yeah.
telling them this before Jesus even came to earth. And it is a beautiful picture of that redemptive work, the redemption work of Jesus. So it's important that we remember all of this background, because it helps us. I would say for me personally, it helps me two ways. Number one, it helps me know that my own faith is rooted in something that is tangible, right? Like historical
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
tangible. And number two, it helps me remember that my small story is part of this huge story that's been happening for
Mm-hmm.
generation. It helps me be a little bit less selfish, maybe is the right word, or it just takes my eyes off of myself and it lifts my eyes up to God, who is an amazing God with a great big
Yes.
purpose and is fulfilling it in his time.
Exactly. Yep. That's good.
And so
That's
we
good.
do have another set of homework for you for this week.
We
Christina, do you want to let
do.
everybody know what that is?
I sure do. For your call to action this week, you are going to review the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you're going to read through Ruth completely, as you may have done it already.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
hey, we're going to do it over again because now you have the background knowledge
yes.
of Ruth now.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's going to make much more sense when you put all of the pieces together. And we are actually going to give you some historical context verses to help you
Yes.
discover more of Ruth. And we can call them like little aha moments.
Yeah,
Those light
that's
bulb
good.
moments. That's actually what I call them in my classroom. As you are digging something and doing something, you're like, oh, and you have that revelation, but also to remember, we want transformation.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we want you to have those light bulb moments. And so you are going to read Deuteronomy 16, Judges 3, and Numbers 25. Again, to give you more of the big picture and just maybe a little bit deeper as you have discovered the background knowledge of Ruth. And actually,
yes,
Deuteronomy 16 is great because it actually gives you all of the festivals that are happening
yeah,
in the time period for Israel. And so also too, we want you to go back and listen to Ruth for the Bible Project. We want you to read Ruth and Judges, because remember, Book of Ruth is taking place during the time of Judges. So we want to make sure that even visually you can see, and also take notes. It's okay if you watch, but also take notes as you're listening to the Bible Project or reading as well for the Book of Ruth and Judges.
yeah.
And all the links will be in the show notes.
Yeah, and let me just clarify too, when you said to go back and read the book of Ruth and Judges, the homework is not to actually read through the entire book of Judges. I think that
Oh,
you're
did I
going
say that?
to
Oh,
It's okay. I just don't want
whoops.
people to be confused and be like, that is so much homework in a week. What it is to read through the book of Ruth again, having this deeper historical understanding, and also to go back and listen. If you haven't done so already, listen to the Bible Project of Ruth and listen to the Bible Project of Judges. That is just a
Mm-hmm.
really great overview of Judges, helps you understand that time period better that the book is set in.
Oh, I guess I did say that. It clearly says Judges 3, and I'm like, yeah, read the whole book of Judges. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, sorry, y'all. Yeah,
So
don't do that.
So just again, all of those verses that we want you to read for your homework, as well as the Bible Project overview of Ruth and the overview of Judges, it is all going to be linked in the show notes. So you do not need to try and scroll through Google and try and find them. There will be links in the show note for you to go read them. Hopefully this will just allow you. We did a shallow dig on the background, and now we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dig. And hopefully these, I love what Christina said, these will hopefully give you some aha moments.
Aha moments.
So in closing today, we thank you so much for being here. We just want to give you a moment to share this episode with a friend. That just really allows these episodes about how to study God's word go into the hands and eventually the hearts of other women. We thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, besties. We'll see you later.
All right. That was great. Let me stop it.